doing, since there's only a couple of us here today, what I'm going to be speaking to is the broader class at large, people who watch the recording and stuff. And I want to remind everybody that the students that attend these live whenever possible consistently have a greater opportunity, have a greater proficiency towards earning A's. And if you don't watch these live, if you only watch the recording, you can still get A's. I have lots of A students that do that, but there is a greater proportion of the people that that attend live every time that do get A's. And I think it's more of an indication of mindset than anything else. But, you know, I do also know that there's at least 3 students at work that their shift actually doesn't get out until 8:30 or 10. And so, and of course, they're doing the best that they can. Anyway, so thank you very much, Ryan and America, for being here. And you guys will be spokesmodels for the rest of the class. And I hope you don't mind too much. I wanted to talk about a couple different things. And I realized that there's something that I need to do. I have about a half a dozen different websites that people can go to get citations, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Before we do that, did you guys have a good weekend, and did you do anything interesting? And I want you to understand before you answer, I honestly really don't care, but I'm trying to create this kind of fictional persona that I do care, and I want you to feel comfortable coming into the class. So that's where I'm coming from. So did you? So what did you guys do? Anything fun over the weekend? Nothing.
I hung out with my wife, and that's always super fun. And she's from Brazil, so it's
Oh, cool.
like kind of, yeah, it's a fun kind of cultural experience whenever we get that kind of time together. So, and we're expecting our first kid in the beginning of November. So these times when it's just her and I are few and far between. So, just nice and easy, but I'm really trying to savor it. So,
I think that's important. I think it's really important for the next month and a half to almost keep a journal, take mental snapshots of every time you're well rested, every time you're calm, and every time the house is quiet, because after November, that will never happen again. Until you're old and feeble.
yeah,
But
I've been told.
no, that's good. I'm glad you have some time. It's a big part of being human is creating families, and a lot of us are fortunate enough to have the families of people we grow up with, and we enjoy making that connection. Uh, and sometimes, and a lot of us have the good fortune of being able to choose the family we pull around us. And family time is always kind of fun, regardless of how you define it. I see that's really good. Good memories to make. I was reading somewhere the other day, nobody is going to be 98 years old and wish they had spent more time on Instagram. A lot of us are going to be thinking, hopefully we won't be, but there's a good chance we will be thinking, why didn't I go out to Pine Valley? It's right there, and I never hiked out there. Or why didn't I go kayak on Navajo Lake? It's right there, and I didn't do it. And I love having those kinds of lists of fun stuff to do. And my wife and I, every chance we get, we will go out and do one of those, take another one of the fun things off. Like we've seen 3 of the ghost towns that are around St. George, just check them out. That kind of stuff is always entertaining to me. But as we are going into weekly reflections and research and discovery projects and stuff like that, I wanted to talk a little bit about those and kind of clarify some things. And again, this is America, you've already been in one of my classes, and Ryan, you already sat through an earlier version of the same kind of material. So this is mostly for the people that are listening to this recording or watching this recording. I have a list of websites that are free that help you to create appropriate MLA style citations for your resources when you do your research. And when we do research papers and things like that, or when we do research for discovery projects, it is really important to do correct research so you're working with valuable information or worthwhile information. And a lot of that is to help facilitate the learning that we go through as we try to navigate just our place, either our place in the academic setting or our place in the universe at large. In the communications and arts fields, I believe that the academic standard is MLA style citation. I don't know what the MLA letters stand for. Probably something very smart sounding, but that is the style that we're looking for. And if you do, 17 seconds of research, look up MLA citation format website or do a search for anything like that, it will give you a list of several different options where you just plug in the URL of whatever site you're visiting, and it will give you a full MLA style citation. Why is that important? Why do we need to cite our research like that? And cite in this case is spelled C-I-T-E. And either of you can answer.
To kind of create like a statement of provenance as to where we got our information, and also to ensure that the people who did the work to allow us to have that information get credited and are able to be traced back by other people who may be interested in our work.
Yeah, and I think those three reasons are all of equal importance, I think. To honor the people that did the previous research so that other people can follow in our footsteps, and to really validate what we're doing. That's excellent. Do you know what the problem is when you are doing something on AI and you asked it for citations? Do you guys know what the problem is with doing that? The problem is that all but I think there's 3 AI chat programs now that actually will do it correctly, but that means there's about 40 that don't. What they are established to do is to generate networks of statistical probabilities for word use. It's not a research tool, it's a guidance tool. It's an organizational tool. So chat is not like a search engine at all. What it does do is it scrolls through all the available information that it has and tells you, according to the specs that you give it, the parameters you give it, what the highest word use, proximity word use that it's observed. And so that's why I say it's really good for organizing thoughts and things like that. But it is lousy for doing original research, and it is lousy for getting accurate citations because it will see where the punctuation goes and the highest probability of the punctuation and those words gathering together rather than give you an actual usable citation. That's important because if you do use chat in a paper, you've got to use your own correct MLA style citations, because otherwise the paper gets automatically flagged by a lot of software, and your teacher, if they look up any of those citations, they'll realize that there's nothing there. It's completely invalid. I know America, you remember me talking about this, and I don't know if you remember what I said about it, but what is really good about Wikipedia and what is really bad about Wikipedia in regards to research.
Wikipedia gives you like an overall summary, but the problem is that a lot of people go in and just edit the information. But the nice thing about it is that you can go into the sources cited section of each article and you can go to those sources instead and grab the information from there.
Yes, absolutely perfect. Gold star. Um, that is exactly right. Wikimedia is not good as a principal source, but it is excellent as a source for further research, just like America was saying. And one of the biggest reasons why it is not a good source for primary um, information is that there is absolutely no gatekeeper for the people typing things in to Wikipedia other than statistically improbable extremes of um, swearing. You know, it will flag things if people use a lot of nasty language, but that's about it. So anybody can enter stuff in. But the citations they are required to be clickable links to actual sources, and so you can go there, collect that information, plug that URL into Citation Machine or Scribber or one of these other MLA citation producing sites like that, and it will give you a valid citation. That will not work with ChatGPT or any of another 3 or 4 dozen chat programs, but it will work with the on-site, the sites that do the MLA citations for you. What is, there is something that you absolutely have to do at the end of each citation. And do either of you remember what the phrase is that you put in after you post that correctly formatted MLA style citation? What's the last little few word phrase that you put in?
Accessed on.
That's right, accessed on with the date. Doesn't matter what kind of format you use for the date, as long as it's consistent with every time you use that in that particular paper. This is important for a number of reasons. You guys have heard of archive.org. I love it. This is the website where you can go and see exactly what the internet was doing at any time that that website was online and target it specifically. We all know that links get broken, links disappear, new links are generated. And when you do your citation, a lot of the times you can have use a format that also has a URL added to it. You don't have to because people can look it up. But when you state accessed on, that tells people the precise moment that you got to that information. So even if the link is broken through Wayback Machine or archive.org, whoever is following your research can go right back to exactly what you saw and exactly when you saw it, which I think is remarkable. And I mentioned Richard Hoagland. He died just recently, sadly, but he was one of these guys who did a lot of work showing like face of Mars and using NASA photographs to demonstrate probability of alien superstructures on other planets. The reason why that has any sort of significance or validity for this class is because a lot of the times Richard Hoagland would find interesting photos that NASA would repost 2 days later, either airbrushed or altered some way. And because of things like archive.org, he was able to see the original posting. And I think since NASA, they're funded by taxpayer dollars and they should be open source, which is part of their mandate for these kinds of things. So it is kind of, it makes me wonder what's really going on when, 3 days after the original posting, they replace it with a completely different image. I think more often than not, it's because some ding dong was jumping the gun and posting the image before it was in the right queue. And but it would be so cool if we lived in a world where there were actually alien bases on the moon. I think that'd be awesome. That's what I'm rooting for, anyway. But so that is important. And what is that? Why is that important in this class? Well, let me share my screen really quick here. I'm going to try to. There we go. Okay, these are research and discovery projects. I had a good question last class period about there's supposed to be 7 of these. 2 are required to be research projects, 2 are required to be discovery projects, and the rest can be whatever you want. What I should have written was 2 out of the projects that you do need to be research, 2 of them need to be discovery, but the rest of them can be a mix of those 2, however you want to proportion that up. So if you want to do 3 research projects and all the rest are discovery projects, that's perfectly fine. What you cannot do is all of them discovery projects. There needs to be at least 2 of one or the other, and then the rest can be what any combination of those 2 styles. The biggest difference between these 2 styles of projects, the research projects, this is when you go online, you watch videos, you talk to people, you can interview people, all that kind of stuff, and then you can you present the research that you've done. And there's 3 different ways that you can present your research. You can do a PowerPoint presentation recorded with your voiceover. You need to do it in a video format that can be uploaded to YouTube. The simplest way to do this is make your PowerPoint or Google Slides presentation, then record yourself giving it on Teams. So you don't ever have to show up on the camera, it's just your voice. And I've had people in the class before who did not want to have their voice recorded, and that's fine. They just wrote a script and had somebody else record it, reading their script. And that's perfectly cool. Because they're the student themselves were the ones that put together the research and generated the slides. The second one you can do is annotated bibliography, and that includes 5 sources. In this, what this is, and I describe each of these, but the annotated bibliography is you have 5 sources, and they can be a combination of videos, articles, online museum websites, which are really fun, or other online sources. And even you can even go to the library and check out a real live book and use that. In this, Ryan, do you remember how you are supposed to organize the citations? Do you organize them in the way that in the order that you use them, or do you organize them alphabetically?
I think the MLA convention is alphabetical, but we probably should be using in-text citations too, right?
I don't think you need to. If you want to, I would just say put a number and then say in the first number, give the author and name, and then everything else you just say, give that author's name again, and then at the end you can have everything. But the annotated bibliography is a little bit different than a paper like that. An annotated bibliography is you have 5 sources. Each citation is followed by 2 paragraphs, and the paragraphs, the first one is a summary paragraph where you talk about the information in the annotated citation. And the second paragraph for each citation is reflection, where you talk about what you learned from that information or how it's important to your subject matter. In this case, in the annotated bibliography, all 5 sources need to be organized alphabetically. And the format is citation, accessed on phrase at the end of the citation, the summary paragraph, which is 2 to 3 sentences, and then the reflection paragraph, which is 3 to 5 sentences. And then you go to the next alphabetically organized citation. So that's really good. Now, for the in-paper citations, you could do a PDF with 8 photos that you talk about, and each photo you give the reference that you're referring to, or you could put a footnote with the reference and stuff like that, and then at the very end you include the full reference citations in alphabetical order at the end of that. And if you're going to do a PDF report, that is more like the standard report that a lot of people will do, but you do need to include at least 8 images. And most of those are going to be 5 to 8 pages long, depending on the site, how big the images are. What I have seen, one student turned in a 5-page PDF for one of these research projects that just had the 8 photos, and each photo was so big they took up most of a sheet of paper. And that they sadly did not get a very good grade on that, because you do, this is supposed to reflect your actual research. And if you do the PowerPoint or like number one, I think is the only one that you're actually going to be recording yourself. If you're going to do that, it can't be more than 4 or 5 minutes long. And usually 3 to 5 minutes is absolutely perfect for that. There needs to be at least 6 slides, and I describe that. So the PowerPoint is described in this paragraph. The annotated bibliography is described in this paragraph, and then the PDF is described in this one. Now, the difference with the discovery projects is the discovery projects, you need to pick a topic that is related to this class. And do either of you remember the time parameters of this class? What is the time window that we're studying in 2720?
1350 to present.
Yes, exactly. It's a Renaissance to contemporary art. So when you do your discovery project, this is when you would remake something that you've seen or that we referenced in the class, make something that's in the style of a time period there. For a discovery project, you have research material that is the inspiration for whatever it is that you're making. And this can be presented in a number of different ways. And I'll just give a couple examples. I've had a number of different people that would draw in a contemporary scene or a scene that they set up in the style of an artist from that time period. And I think we deal with a little bit of Japanese art, and somebody did a contemporary scene, but in the style of, I believe it was Meiji era Japanese art, which looks really cool. Somebody else did a pencil drawing in the style of a Van Gogh sketch. Those kinds of things are really cool. And how they presented that is they did a time lapse of them going through, and as you're watching the time lapse, they talk about, this is my research, this is how I came across this is what I learned from seeing what they did, this is why I made the choices that I do. And then the last area is they pause on the image so you can see the full image, and they talk about it. And then you can also have a last screen that shows the citations of your research that you did, or when you submit it, you include that as a separate document. I've also mentioned that the woman who did Viking style makeup, where she talks about her research as you watch her put on the makeup. I've also had people reconstruct historic materials like pots and things like that. So that, and they're constantly talking about the material while you watch the time lapse. In the previous class, like that Ryan was in, Caleb was talking about, and I think America, you may have been in that class too, but Caleb was talking about the tea pie that he made that was inspired by the tea pie that he saw in a Baroque or Enlightenment era still life painting. And so, he's tying it to the class specifically within the time frame of the class, but the Discovery Project gives you an opportunity to try a recipe, or to remake somebody's art, or to make, for example, late 16th century German chainmail, or whatever, if you're a metal worker. So there's a lot of different kinds of opportunities that you have for the Discovery Projects. And one thing that I wanted to do is talk a little bit about some of the submissions for the challenge moving forward, because I am going to be grading these, and then I want people to know if they don't get a good grade, they can resubmit material. So I'm sharing this, but this is pretty good. This is a pretty good submission. It follows the format that I included an example of, where you have an initial sentence that describes the project. To use only notebook, paper, and a pen to complete an art project. Okay. And then this talks about doodling in the pen, and this is more of an exploration on what art means. So this ties in with the 20th century. And what I would say on this, they comment on the elements and principles of the art and everything like that. Talk about the artist. The only thing that I would say to add to this, if you're going to use this kind of a thing, is tie it in with in the actual project, tie it specifically to a particular artist, a particular set of artists, or a particular time period. But it is good that this has a particular that format that we talked about. Same thing. This is also has a really good format. Influence of Christianity from the Renaissance compared to modern day. You could use do a research presentation on this, where you talk about maybe 4 different periods of art in Europe and how it's apparent that Christianity impacted the art. I think that would be really good because we already talked about the Renaissance and learning to speak Renaissance, seeing the visual imagery and the symbolism. So I think this is a good one too. And this one is really pretty good, but they need to get full credit. They need to add one last line that describes the hour amount that this project will take. I think that would be good. That one talked about Japan during the 1500s. And then this is kind of fun, making a short video on the history of self-portrait art. And you could do that in several different things, and talking about how to cite what kind of citations they use, and at the end they talk about 4 or 5 hours to complete. So these are all excellent examples. And what I will be doing over the next couple of days is compiling all of these, putting these into specific document so that everybody can see that. And I'm also extending the due date on this for a week, and I will change that just as soon as I can. Now, this one, I think these are excellent ideas. The only thing that this person needs to do to get full credit on these is to add another line that gives the time period, the time frame, because then it would fit the format that I showed as a demonstration at the beginning. The format on these are absolutely perfect. This is great. And then this talks about smaller art movements that took place around the time, close to the Renaissance, and several other things like that. I love the way that the person formatted it. It makes my OCD happy. All right, now we're going to get back to talking about the Northern Renaissance. But before we do that, I want to ask you guys, do you have any questions about the projects or citations? Because you may use citations in the weekly reflections, but you will use them in the projects to just reinforce or to validate your research. So,
if it was possible, I'd kind of be curious to see what some successful projects have looked like to kind of get a better idea of kind of like what an A looks like.
okay, let's see. Okay, I want to show you. This is one that was submitted that I think is really nicely done. It is missing the voiceover video, so I trust the individual will fix that. So let me share this with you. This is very clear. It's on fresco techniques, and this person has given images that are from the Renaissance and about shows images of frescoes, and they talk quite a bit about styles and how frescoes were made. This, so we are focusing on 1350 to the contemporary time, but this gives a little bit of historical context for the frescoes. And as long as this individual focuses primarily on frescoes from the Renaissance forward, then this one will be just fine. This will be appropriate. And it looks like they're talking about 16th, 17th century. They talked about the Renaissance, Michelangelo, and then they do a demonstration on how to make a fresco. And I think that's great. The only thing that's missing on this is all of these citations need to be in MLA format. And this should be presented, the whole thing should be presented with narrative voiceover, so as a video. But other than that, this is really, really well done. I love how they demonstrate how to, show a little bit how to do it, and they'll talk through this in the video. And then I also enjoy how they talk a little bit about the historical context. So this is one that with just a little bit of tweaking will definitely be a very solid A. Does that help, Ryan?
Yes, sir. Yeah, thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Let's see. All right, now I'm trying to get back to where I was, brain-wise and everywhere else. But I'm doing a better job this time because last period I went on just a little bit longer than I expected, so we didn't have a lot of time to talk about the stuff. But I want to talk about Northern Renaissance. And the other thing I wanted to mention too is that each of the weekly research project, or each of the weekly reflections should be done for that week's information. And I screwed up on the due dates. I'm not going to take all the blame. I submit this information to Canvas. I asked Canvas to do the due dates correctly, and it didn't. So I'm going to have to go back and fix that. And I think that what it's telling us is the Mughal one is also due on Sunday, and that is not the case. So I'm going to go. Actually, you guys don't have to worry about that just yet. I'm going to go and let's see. Okay, this is a little bit frustrating. When I go through Canvas, sometimes there's a lag time between what I click on and what shows up, and sometimes I'm not patient enough. And so what I click on, it doesn't look like it's doing anything, so I'll click on something else, and then the wrong thing shows up just because I wasn't patient. But anyways, I'm changing the due date for week 3 reflection right now, and that should be correct. Okay, and then I will go back, and if it looks like there's too many things that are due all at once, that's because you're right. There are too many things that are all due at once, and I will do whatever I can to get that fixed as soon as possible. I would really appreciate it as you guys are as everybody is going through the module and stuff. If there are links that don't work, please let me know. Please email me. In the last class, several people noticed things like that and were able to help me. And that just makes it so that if you tell me and I can fix it, makes it a lot easier for everybody else. All right, do you guys remember from last week what the word Renaissance means?
Renewal.
Yeah, it means rebirth, essentially. It's a new birth. Yeah, renewal is very good, very apt. The Renaissance happened at the end of, I think overall there were about 8 crusades altogether. And these were world wars at the time where people were fighting each other over things that, when we look back at history, none of the reasons that people give for warfare, or very few reasons that people give for warfare, ever seem to make sense. And but it was very integral to the lives and the worldviews of the people that participated, that lived in these times. And people are coming back home after seeing things that they never even imagined, coming back home to Europe. And I think people, the Renaissance came about, I think, because of this cross-pollination of cultures and just an expansion of possibilities and imagination from people seeing things that they never imagined before. The average person in Europe, between about 400 AD and possibly even way earlier, and the time of the Renaissance, up until actually about first part of the 19th century, most people lived and died within 22 miles of their home where they were born. And we think of that today, that's how far away is Mesquite or La Virgen? I mean, that's Cedar City is twice as far away. Can you imagine living and dying just within a day's horse ride of where you were born? That is amazing. And so when people come home after being in Istanbul and seeing a building so big that clouds form under the roof, or coming home from Egypt and seeing literally mountains that are made by human beings and animals and creatures that nobody would have even imagined could possibly exist. I mean, it was mind-blowing. And coming home with the engineering tools and math that they had available in Europe, a lot of people were inspired to create things because of what they had experienced, and recreate that kind of frame of reference. And I think that's absolutely fascinating. And that all goes into creating the technology and rationale behind a lot of stuff that was built during the Renaissance. But what do you remember, and what do you remember about that painting that we looked at last week? Do you remember the title of that video that we watched? It was like decoding, speaking Renaissance or something like that. A lot of people, you have a lower literacy rate. It was about half of what it had been 700 years earlier. You have, I think, between 1 out of 5 and 1 out of 8 people could actually read. Book binding was important because it represented portable wealth, but a lot of people that carried books with them couldn't even read the books that they moved. All they saw them was as picture books or prestige items to be seen, to validate your presence in society, not necessarily to be used, which I think is really interesting. Well, we talk about the Renaissance, and we talk specifically about the Northern Renaissance. And I will give you a hint of what the difference is. This is where the Italian Renaissance happened. This is Italy, right here. What is right here? This is where the Northern Renaissance happened, up here. France, Germany, Northern Europe, way up high, stuff like that. What is going on right here? Can you guys see this map?
Yeah.
Okay. What is separating Italy from the rest of Europe?
A huge mountain range.
Yeah, these are the Alps, the huge mountains. And if we look at this larger map here, to get up here, to get to France and Germany, to get to Holland, and these areas up here, it is actually easier to sail through the Mediterranean and into the Atlantic Ocean and up to the North Atlantic. It's actually easier to do that than it is for a lot of people to cross the Alps. But in either case, what that means is there's a tremendous amount of expense of both money and energy between the rest of Italy or Italy itself and all of the rest of Europe, particularly the north. And so what is going on here in the art world is going to look very different because communication is different. There's going to be different attitudes, different ideas. What is interesting to me is right down here in Italy. Can you guys see my mouse when I move it over this image?
Yes.
Okay. What is interesting to me is a lot of the money used to fund public works projects and art projects was directly related to the church income right through here. Where do you think a lot of the money for the art projects and things like that came from up here? Because of the expense of moving, a lot of church money is probably not going to make its way easily up to here. That's probably not going to be the case. So how would art be funded?
Credit?
Well, that's interesting because the idea of the credit card had its genesis in Holland, Northern Europe. The funding is controlled by merchants. And yeah, you're right. So here, if it's funded by the church, what do you think the subject matters of the Renaissance in Italy are going to be? What are some of the subject matters do you expect? I'm thinking things like Bible stories, history of the church, important events in church history, maybe people that supported the church that were important, people whose governance allowed for the church to continue, a lot of relationship to the church because they were the ones that are funding. And people with money are not going to buy something that they don't want to see. So what they do spend their money on is going to be stuff that they want to see, which is stuff that would support interests and focuses of the church. Now, if Northern Europe, though, a lot of the funding comes from merchants and businesses, what do you think how is that going to affect and impact what art produces? There are going to be Bible stories that are related, but you're also going to be having a lot more scenes and imagery that relates directly to things that are not specifically church related. Like, for example, landscapes, historical events, portraits of families, different, and not, in Italy, there were portraits of families of people, but they were usually people in very prestigious positions. But if you have merchants that control that have a lot of the wealth, then of course they're going to want to see things that are interesting to them. So portraiture then becomes of middle income families, merchant class families, not just royalty and powerful nobility. So one of the big differences is going to be subject matter. And also, do you guys know where the Reformation happened? Where Protestantism was actually born? It was not in Italy. That's where the Catholic Church really reigned as far as religion goes. Martin Luther was from Germany. And a lot of Protestantism happened throughout Northern Europe. And of course, the Anglicans are here in England. So it is interesting to see that there is a very specific shift of focus as we're separated by all this water that's expensive to traverse and takes a long time, or all these mountains which are expensive to travel over and take a lot of time. I think that is very interesting. Now I want to watch a couple of videos with you guys. And I do not know, I have not had a lot of problem with these showing up before in YouTube videos. So what I want is, if you guys do not see these videos, or if I have to edit them out, please watch them on your own. And I will get to them in just a sec, but we are going to watch a couple of these that are relatively short. And then we are going to watch them. So I'm just calling them up. And we're going to be using the tools of artistic critique to examine this information. Okay, this first video is about 9 minutes, but it is totally worth it. So we're going to watch the entire thing. All right, you guys ready? And again, when I'm sharing screens, I can't see you. So if you guys want to talk, don't raise your hand. Just open up your mic. I'm going to go ahead and share this. All right, can would one of you tell me, can you guys see this? It's a video called Northern European versus Italian Renaissance. Can you
We
guys
can
see
see
it?
Yes.
it.
Okay.
Yeah.
This opportunity at the end of the Northern European Renaissance, now that we've seen Northern Europe as well as Italy, to compare the two so that you can see those differences side by side. I want to look at a number of different elements, starting with specialty. In Northern Europe, we tend to see intense realism, like we do from the patron and St. Stephen in the Melun Diptych. You can tell that these are realistic depictions. They're not idealizing the form in any way. Whereas in Italy, they tend to idealize the form. For example, the tomb of Giuliano de' Medici, who is in fact a pope, but being depicted by Michelangelo as a warrior, as a general, trying to capture his character and idealize his form. To the Italians, the form and realism is unimportant. After all, you don't remember what someone looks like, especially before the age of the camera. In Northern Europe, they want to focus on the image of the person. What do they actually look like? In terms of style, we tend to see simplified forms and measured proportions in Italy. So we see this young woman's portrait by Leonardo, and it's been simplified. There's no real background. The figure itself is simplified. He's not capturing the details of the skin and a lot of local color. He's capturing the overall shape. Whereas when we're looking at Northern Europe and the man in the red turban, what we see is lifelike features with a certain unflattering honesty. You could imagine that if this man suffered from a skin condition, we would probably see it in the painting. As it is, Van Eyck here has used a lot of local color to give us a sense of exactly what this person would have looked like. Whereas in Italy, it's more of an Instagram model. That's really what we're looking at, sort of an idealized form versus a realistic form. In terms of subject, in Italy, we tend to see religious and mythological scenes, as we see with Galatea by Raphael and the Last Supper by Leonardo. Whereas in Northern Europe, we tend to see scenes that are looking at religious and domestic themes, and they frequently mix. So we see religious images in domestic settings. We see a lot more humble images. That's what I'm looking for. So we don't have the grandiosity of Italy. These are images that would relate to people simply because they're things they would see, such as a butcher's stall by ARTH. When he ties in the religion, he's drawing you into something you already know. He's making it more relatable. Whereas the Last Supper, unless you happen to be a monk that's a member of that monastery, it's not nearly as relatable for the average viewer. When you look at figures, the Italians tend to have these heroic male nudes. And I'm focusing on male nudes. There were more male nudes in the Renaissance in Italy than you see female nudes. And they're looking at these massive heroic figures, usually focusing on anatomy. Whereas in Northern Europe, we tend to see prosperous citizens depicted in all of their fineries, such as the image of Giovanni Arnolfini and his wife. They're showing off their status, whereas in Italy, they're showing stature. But in Italy, we're not seeing the middle class being depicted that much, whereas in Northern Europe, we see it all the time. And that's the difference. If I'm looking at a biblical figure, he's going or she is going to be bigger than life. They have to be grand and idealized. Whereas a middle class average person, someone that I can shake hands with and talk to, they need to be depicted in a very realistic way. They still need that sense of status, though, that sense of, well, almost heroism. So you're going to depict them with finery, with texture, with fine robes in a well-appointed room, as is our example here. In terms of portraits, we see the difference between Northern Europe and Italy. And I've been harping on this a couple of times throughout 16th century Northern Europe. In Italy, we tend to see simplified forms, reserved forms, very formal images, usually with a background or something to draw us past the image. The artist is trying to create sort of a complete composition, as we see with the Mona Lisa, but she is simplified in a lot of ways. For example, there's no local color. There's no sense of red to the cheeks, for example. Instead, Leonardo is capturing the shape as if he's capturing a sculpture. Whereas in Northern Europe with Terling, we see something that is more realistic. He's not trying to idealize who she is. She's not trying to change who she is. She's trying to capture, in this case, Elizabeth I as princess. And we see a lot more realism there. We also see a lot more symbolism. The prayer book, the blank book in the background, or that ambiguous background, as well as the finery that tell us her station and who she is. This is an attempt to reveal individual personality through symbolism, something we don't generally see in Italy, which is why we look at the Mona Lisa and we say she's got that very enigmatic smile, because we can't tell anything about her. We don't even know if that's really what she looked like. In terms of technique, we tend to see fresco, tempera, and some oil painting in Italy. And in this case, the example I'm giving you is from the Sistine Chapel ceiling. This is a fresco. Whereas in Northern Europe, we almost always see oil. And oil paints allow for a lot of detail. You, of course, can go in and rework an area over and over again. The paint won't dry for days, weeks, or in some cases, months. Whereas in Italy, they're using primarily tempera and fresco, two techniques that require speed and accuracy. Michelangelo, when he creates this image, only has 3 to 6 hours to create the figure. Anything beyond that, he has to cut away the plaster and replaster and restart, leaving lines in between called giornales, or revealing the giornales, the day's work. So we see vast differences. In Italy, they're going to focus on, for example, the human figure. They're going to focus on form, because that's what you can do with temperas that dry in 20 minutes or frescoes that dry in a few hours. Whereas in Northern Europe, by using oils, I can suddenly start dealing with finer details, textures, such as the fur-lined robe that Albrecht Dürer is wearing there, or his hair, or his facial hair. I can put a lot more detail into that piece simply based on the media or technique that I'm using. Finally, we have emphasis. Now, in Italy, the emphasis is always on anatomical structure. So in other words, you need to have a figure that is anatomically correct, and then you would put clothing over it. And you always have that sense of the figure under the clothing, or the anatomical correctness of a nude figure like we see in Donatello's David. But it's always on that human form and the perfect proportions of the human form, proportions that can change slightly depending on the artist, but proportions nonetheless. Whereas in Northern Europe, you're focusing on visible appearance. So you end up with this assumption of Mary being depicted as if Mary has no body underneath all of that clothing. It's as if her head and hands exist in a mountain of cloth. And so we get that outward appearance, but that's where we get that strange appearance where it's almost like the stick figure you drew in first grade with the t-shirt around it. The t-shirt has no relation to the body underneath of the stick figure, and that's what we see in this assumption in other Northern European pieces. They're focusing on the clothing, not on the figure. Now, these are just some of the differences. There's a lot of other differences that are going to take place between Italy and Northern Europe in the Renaissance.
What are some of the things that you can see? Can you see a very specific set of differences between the Italian and the Northern European Renaissance? I think there are some very specific things that are different. What are some of the differences that you see?
I like what he said about realism versus the Instagram model. I thought that was clever.
Very much. Yeah, it's like the Arnolfini family portrait. They are two people. I mean, it's very rare that even Instagram model would allow herself to be photographed while pregnant. There's a lot of people that will just do from the chest up, when they start getting pregnant. And it's interesting to me because it seems to me that there is a very specific shift in focus of what's important to members of society. I like what he had to say about idealism versus realism, and I think that ties in exactly with what you're saying. What did you notice, America?
I noticed that the in Northern Renaissance art, it's more detailed than it is with Italian. Like he was saying, it's more simplistic, whereas Northern European art has a lot going on.
Yeah, it feels like it's like the Northern Renaissance stuff is stuff that you could actually touch. Northern European Renaissance, but Italian, it feels like it only exists in somebody's imagination. It's not quite. It doesn't feel entirely real. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about? Yeah, I totally agree. Now we're not going to watch this next video. I do want to. I'm just going to show some of the images in this video, and then we'll talk about it. But you guys are really good at picking up there are differences, and we can see those differences. So if we look at this one on the right is Northern European Renaissance, and the one on the left is very much Italian Renaissance. And the one on the left, we have a very stylized, it's an architectural landscape, it's an architectural space. And we have a fictional meeting of all these people that represent the best and brightest men through the ages. And it's interesting to me because there is a lot of attention on the detail spent in like these symbolic sculptures, the geometry of the ceiling areas, the barrel vaulted ceiling areas, the arch, the parquet floor, and there's a lot of detail, a lot of energy given to the placement of all these figures. But this feels very much to me like a very grandiose kind of theater setting. Like I'm thinking Royal Shakespearean operatic performance kind of thing. It feels like everybody has their marks that they've stepped to, and the person right before said, "Okay, we're starting a movie. Everybody, start your talking, and then we're going to take this picture." That's what it feels like to me. It's very staged. And we look over here at Holbein's image right here. This is fascinating to me because we're talking very similar time period. But in this, these figures, they're not representing the idealized forms like right here. Those aren't being shown off. You can really see these robes look like they've been lived in a little bit. It looks like it's a believable landscape. This looks like a stage set almost. This looks like they're outdoors, and this is a real thing going on. And I think that's fascinating. The sky is very dramatic. And there is some of that, you guys were talking about attention to detail and things like that. And I think the way that this guy moves feels to me more like the person painting this caught a moment of real movement, as opposed to the person painting this having everybody stand on their marks and to start moving according to the director. Do you guys get any sort of a similar sense between those two images?
I feel like on my end, I'm getting kind of a broader overall view. Like before a half hour ago, I probably wouldn't have separated Northern European and Italian Renaissance art as being that different. And now I'm seeing some of it, but in this example, I'm seeing it more in the figures than in the locations, because I feel like what I've learned so far, it seems like, the School of Athens, as far as a location goes, would be kind of complementary to what the video was teaching us.
Yeah, and it's really kind of interesting. We can definitely see a very specific difference with the figures. That is absolutely true. And it does feel to me like this is almost like a stage set on the left, and on the right it could be a stage set, but it feels like they put more time into it. And now here we're looking at what's that?
Oh yeah, I feel like the Last Supper could be just as much of a stage set as the School of Athens. Um, with that being said, however,
Yeah, I think so, definitely. And we look at here, these are two depictions of the human form, and we are looking at something it's relatively in a very similar time frame. So we have Michelangelo's David here, and then we have uh, Night, Death, and the Devil, and I don't know, Dürer is absolutely astounding. But the difference seems to me to be there's a couple things that I'll point out, and then you guys can weigh in. With David, Michelangelo is very intent on making something that fits an idealized form. He's showing a shepherd as somebody who works out 3 times a day, has a very lean diet, and is not all that shy. He's sitting in a very restful pose that has a little bit of energy. This kind of pose where you have one knee locked and the other leg kind of resting on the toe or the ball of the foot is called contrapposto, which means literally off balance. But it is a very stylized pose. And then we get over to the Albrecht Dürer, the knight. This feels like a Spanish knight. He's trying to look really good, but it still feels like it's a little bit more believable person. It reminds me of um, Don Quixote a little bit. And the horse feels like, yes, it's a stylized horse, but it does feel like it's a little bit more accessible. It feels like a horse that's been duded up for a show as opposed to a horse that could never possibly exist because it's way too perfect. And then again, Albrecht Dürer puts a lot of energy into the setting, which I think is really interesting. America, what's your take on it? The Albrecht Dürer is Northern Renaissance and Michelangelo is Italian. What are the differences that you can see?
The difference that I'm noticing is that when it comes to Italian, they're really more focused on form. There's not a lot of movement going on with like their sculptures or their paintings, whereas with Northern European art, in most of them there's some sort of movement going on. There's something going on. They're not static.
Yeah, I think very much. I mean, like this dog, the horse it looks like that could be an Italian equestrian statue. That's a good stance, with the difference being his right hind leg is up and this dog is running. So yeah, there is quite a bit more movement here than there is with David, very much so. Then we look at these two portraits. She does not look very happy. She reminds me a lot more of that Mary that we saw last week. But then you look at Peter Bruegel, the elders, the wedding feast or the peasant wedding. These people look to me like they're real people. She does not look very happy on the left. She looks like this is almost painted from a death mask kind of thing. It doesn't feel like there's a lot going on there. It is beautifully proportioned. It's beautifully laid out, but it's way too smooth to have life in it. If she actually moved, it would freak me out. But here, I can almost hear the burps in the background. I can almost hear the kids yelling and people laughing because this feels to me so realistic. Whether or not the proportions are perfect doesn't matter. The movement, the way that people are looking in different directions, it feels like this is a real thing. I just think that is always really fascinating to me. And so we can compare these. Every other one, these are Italian, and these are Northern European. And in every single case, the Italian ones feel like they're poised, they feel like they're posed, and they feel like they're idealized. And the Northern European one, each one feels like what you guys pointed out, there's more energy and movement going on. This guy is actually in the process of moving, not just standing still, making his mark and just gesticulating. This guy, I mean, there's actually stuff going on in there. And here it almost feels raucous. And, color use seems to be relatively similar. However, it does feel slightly more believable. This guy is something that I can believe in. This guy seems to be a little bit too perfect. And that's just one example. The interior atmosphere around both of these people, this lady just feels to me like she's sickly, if she's a real thing at all. And this feels very lively, like a room that you could actually walk into. And when you see it like this, do you guys see the differences between Italian and Northern are a lot more apparent, aren't they? Yeah, I think so. I think they are. Now, I do want to share this painting with you. This is a really good example of Northern Renaissance painting. This is one of Peter Bruegel's paintings, and it's 4.5 minutes long to hear them talk about it. Let's go ahead and hear them talk about it. So we'll watch this video and then add our own comments at the end.
Just looking at this painting makes me feel cold.
We're looking at Peter Bruegel's The Return of the Hunters, or Hunters in the Snow. It's this wonderful panel painting from the Renaissance, from Flanders, made for a merchant in Antwerp that had asked Bruegel to make 6 panel paintings, which were study of the labors of the months. This is an idea that goes back to manuscript illumination, back to the medieval period, and this is perhaps the very first time in the history of painting where that idea has been brought to this larger scale.
Each one of these paintings represents a different time of year. We're obviously looking at winter here, and we see some hunters returning from their hunt with their dogs, but they haven't got very much to show for their day out hunting.
If you look closely, you can see a rabbit just hanging off the back of one of the hunters, but it is a pretty meager catch, and it does give us a sense of the stresses of winter.
You can see the footprints that they're leaving in the snow, so there's this real sense of trudging through this deep snowy landscape.
And in the foreground, there is that sense of melancholy as well. Their backs are turned to us, the pack of dogs that follow, their heads are down. There's a sense of them being tired and unsuccessful. But as our eye moves down the hill, and it moves down pretty fast, there's almost no middle ground. All of a sudden, we're down in those icy ponds. Then we see a different side of winter. We see playfulness. And in fact, this painting is full of the activities of winter.
So we're not just looking at a lovely landscape, but a landscape that is given meaning by the activities of the people that inhabit it, by their daily routines.
In fact, that idea is an ancient one and comes from Virgil. Bruegel's patron may well have been thinking about Virgil when he commissioned this series, this notion of painting a landscape that is given meaning by the labors of the people within it. Although the image seems as if it is a moment in time, in fact, the painting is carefully composed. Our eye follows the hunters down the hill, which is given a wonderful visual rhythm by those trees. And then my eye wants to ride down to that frozen pond where we see a woman pulling somebody else on a little sleigh.
Yeah.
And then I want to go by those black crows, and under those arches, there's that lovely woman just above who's carrying perhaps some firewood. And then beyond that, we see lots of play taking place.
We do. We see people pulling each other on the ice, children playing and chasing each other, a man about to hit a ball with a stick on the ice, playing kind of ice hockey for the 16th century.
And then perhaps actually somebody who's fallen, whose hat has fallen off.
And this is really typical of Netherlandish painting. It is idea of giving us a lot of visual information, a lot of things to look at, small little narratives, so that we can patiently discover more and more.
Think about the time that this is made. This is the Renaissance. And in Italy, there's an attempt at this moment to perfect, to isolate the most ideal moments. And it's so different from Northern painting, which is concerned with these almost literary narratives.
And the everyday, the mundane.
But it is still interested in finding meaning that comes from the multiplicity of human activities, no matter how prosaic. our eye also can soar through the painting. And
Much like the birds
well,
that we see.
that's exactly what I was thinking. We have the birds who soar through this space, even into the very distant hills that are a reminder that Bruegel had actually made his way from Northern Europe across the Alps to Italy. But unlike some of the other Northerners who made that trip, he doesn't come back with the latest traditions of the Italian Renaissance painters. Instead, he seems to be caught in the landscape. Look at that beautiful Alpine vista that we have in the upper right. There's nothing like that in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
There's nothing like that in Flanders.
Right, when Bruegel made his trip down to Italy, what he seems to have most been impressed with were the Alps. And so this is a good reminder that what we're looking at is not an actual view, for example, that Bruegel saw out his window, but a composed, partially imagined, composite landscape activated by these human figures.
The landscape feels frozen and harsh, but it's warmed by its human inhabitants.
I want to bring it back to the painting right here. If we look at the School of Athens image, I'm going to see if I can find that in here. I don't know if I can. Let's see. Okay, there we go. We look at the School of Athens. I like how he said they were wanting to isolate a particular ideal moment. And then we look at, this overall painting. Yes, it's a single moment, but it's not an idealized moment necessarily. It's a moment that seems to symbolize the entirety of winter. The good and the bad and everything else with all the stuff that's going on. You have a similar number of human figures in this painting as it with the School of Athens painting. There's about the same number of people that are being shown. The difference is in the School of Athens, they're all the same scale or relatively the same scale. And in Peter Bruegel's work, you see these guys are one scale, then you have a little bit of a different scale there, different scale here. And as you go, and the different scales draw you back further and further into the painting. So it's no longer even possible for this to be a set piece, even though it is an imaginary landscape. It feels like it's someplace that you could actually live in and visit. And I think that's absolutely fascinating. And the fact that this guy went to Italy, learned from them, and then went back home and painted this seems to me to really prove that people in Northern Europe had a very different mindset. Even with the same kind of technologies, they had a very different mindset that really informed very differently how they approached art construction. What are you guys' response? Let's hear from America first, and then Ryan. What do you think about this? How is this different than, like, for example, the School of Athens painting? What are some of the things that you find really interesting?
So in this one, I noticed that there's a stronger perspective here. Like we have the foreground with the men on the hill, and then the background with like the rest of the town.
Yeah, very much so. It feels like you're quite a ways away from this because you know that these are people too. Yes, very much so. How about you, Ryan?
The School of Athens looks like it is, in a man-made structure with only men, and is totally lacking these elements of nature and kind of the everyday person. That's, kind of showing how, humans can harmoniously live in such a harsh winter landscape. It are two incredibly different messages, in my opinion.
Oh, and I agree with you completely. And I think it is fascinating that you pointed out something that I see, but I did not even think to comment on. Yeah, School of Athens, I think there's one female figure in the entire thing. and I think it's Hypatia of Alexandria that's in it. But in here, we see two women right down here. And then interspersed here, we see boys, girls, men, and women all throughout. We see a couple women over here. You know, the hunters, these three are male. And it is interesting to me. I think maybe that is one of the reasons why this feels so much more believable, because it is a more realistic spread of population. Yeah, I think that that's completely true. And I love the fact that even though this is supposed to be taking place, in the Netherlands, you have what looks like the Alps up here, and I think that's really kind of interesting. This kind of thing with just the branches at the top of the trees, I think is beautiful, really amazing to me. Let's see. I think I was going to talk to you about one other thing. Yeah. Okay. Here we go. There is some really interesting things that we need to be aware of, and I'll talk a little bit about it. I use this imagery to open up a short discussion on iconography, and it is going to be short because we only have about 12 minutes left. But iconography, rather than having you guys define it on the spot, an icon is essentially an image that becomes a very powerful symbol, and it is usually an image that relates very strongly to the real world. And when we look at this is an icon of, there is some iconography in here, but I think when we look at this, we see a unicorn, we see a stylized tree, we see a stylized landscape around it, we see a corral, a stylized corral. And this opens up the door for a discussion of iconography, because these images become a lot more than just symbolic references. You know, the way that this is displayed with the unicorn front and center, the unicorn symbolizes a number of different things. The tree represents a number of different things, very obviously intended to be symbolic representations of something, whether or not we know what that exact something is. And with iconography, when we look at that, like when we were looking at the video on Do You Speak Renaissance, and I'm going to backtrack just a little bit, but iconography was used hugely in Turkey and the Holy Roman Empire that was the Roman Empire that is now the Orthodox Church. You know, it's not Catholicism, but when Constantine moved to Turkey and set up shop there, that is the time period that's considered to be the fall of Western Rome, but it was the birth of the Eastern Roman Empire that lasted about twice as long as the Western Roman Empire. And I think what's really fascinating about that is I'm not going to watch this video. I just want you guys to know that it's there. Let's see, in just a second. There we go. In the Eastern Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire was in Europe. The Eastern Roman Empire is in Turkey and further east, right around there. In that area, a lot of artists were needed because a big part of religious instruction and religious performance involved imagery of the people that function essentially as doorways into heaven. So imagery of Jesus Christ, imagery of the saints, imagery of holy people. But the demand far outweighed the availability of artists, the available number of artists. And so iconography kind of grew out of this idea of how can we communicate that this image is intended to be an image of Paul the Apostle as opposed to John the Revelator. if we can't depend on the mastery of the artist. And that's where you get this birth of an idea of iconography, where specific facial features were used, and specific hair types, and specific clothing, specific items that the individual had with them. Those were used to identify who the person was, what the Bible story was, as opposed to an artist making somebody that everybody knew was Mary. And I'm going to ask you, what color of robes does Mary typically wear? Do we? Is that something that either of you guys know?
Blue.
Blue. That is part of her iconography. Blue. The symbol behind blue is the sky. It also represents the purity of water and a number of other things. But yeah, you're absolutely right. What flower does Mary usually carry with her?
So blue's part of her iconography, but we learned that blue is kind of a new color to the human eye in the last class. And if I recall correctly, it's
we didn't. What we learned is that there was the word blue was new.
Right.
Blue's
Okay.
always been a color. Like lapis, the Babylonians used lapis, which is very strong blue, and lapis was the stone that was used to represent the same things that the blue of Mary's robe represent. But they didn't have blue as a word. Instead, it was lapis. And so, and that was what we were talking about there, the actual development of the word. And that shows up in the 4th century BC. So, and what we're looking at with the iconography is about 400 to 500 years later. So blue has already been established as a word that people are using. But yeah, you're right. We start seeing these colors, and we know that they mean something very specific. Now we look at, who is this person right here? Can you tell who this person is? Anybody want to guess?
Jesus.
Yes, we know that because there's a halo. The stability of the halo is defined with this cross right here. We know that because he has the Shroud of Turin facial hair and the longer hair here. We know that because he's wearing fine robes. He has a rich blue, which is a royal blue, and he has gold. And then we also know that because he's holding a sacred book. And what mudra are his fingers showing? This is a mudra. It comes from India in Hinduism. But do you know what he's doing right there? That's the symbol that signifies giving a blessing. You make a fist, so the fleshy part of your hand is towards your audience, and then begin opening your hand, and bring your pointer finger and your middle finger up almost straight, and that is the sign of blessing. Or it's the mudra of blessing. Mudra is a Hindu word that means hand meditation, essentially. And we know all those things. It tells us that that's Jesus because this is all iconography, which I think is absolutely fascinating. And there's lots of different examples of this. How do we know that this guy's a king?
The crown.
Yeah, and that comes from iconography. What book is this? If you have no other information, what book is this?
Bible.
Yes. And we know it's a Bible because the cover's gold and it has jewels on it. That all comes from iconography. So if we go back to looking at the Northern Renaissance, we can look at how the Italian Renaissance and the Northern Renaissance both used iconography in different ways. And what I want you to do is go through each of these, and some of these might be videos, but the most important thing is, what is the image? And I think that these are almost all just images. And if we look at, let's see, I'm going to show this just as an image. If we look at this, This is how the Northern Renaissance used iconography. So we have, who's this figure?
We can't see it.
Oh, duh. Okay, how's this? Who's this figure?
Jesus.
Well, how do you know that?
From context, from
Yeah.
what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. And that context is delivered to us through the passage of iconography. Do you guys know what this is? What does this represent?
That's not like merchandise, is it?
Almost. This is actually meant to be the Shroud of Turin. And this is iconography that establishes this individual as a saint because she is holy enough to hold the Shroud of Turin. And we get this woman in blue at the base of the cross is Mary, the Mother of God. And we know that through iconography. Who is this figure? Do you want to guess? He is the apostle that Jesus said to take care of his mom. And this is how he's shown in iconography. Now, these two characters, this is a merchant and the merchant's wife. These are the people that commissioned this painting. And this is the height of celebrity hubris for the time, but it is very common in the Northern European Renaissance. They inserted themselves with kind of establishing their own iconography by, this is their favorite clothing that they wore. They're wearing and demonstrating that they were very pious, and inserting them into this painting that's full of all this iconography to let us know exactly what's going on. You guys want to guess what these four angels represent? They actually represent either the four winds or the four cardinal directions of the compass. The idea that this sacrifice is universal in its impact. They represent the whole world. And those kinds of that symbols that we saw last week with that, do you read Renaissance or do you speak Renaissance? All that stuff, that visual information comes from these discussions on iconography. So go through, click on all those links, look at them. And for you guys watching at home, outside of the Teams meeting, if YouTube edited those clips out, just click on all the links that you see in the module, and at the very least, look at the paintings that are represented. And if you can, listen to the video. That would be really ideal as well. Okay, we are closing up shop. Any last questions before we end everything, wrap up? Okay. Thank you guys for being with me. Thank you for bearing with me. And thank you for answering questions. I know you were on the spot, but I hope it gives you some comfort to know that you were the spokesmodels for the class.
Oh, thank you, sir. And Khele Motshakaram.
Oh, thank you. Doesn't that mean thank you?
Yeah, Persian.
When I got back from Iran, I lost everything except Khele Mamnoon, and that's it.
I'm losing so much. It's really kind of sad, but my wife's from Brazil and Portuguese is my linguistic focus now. So,
well, thank you guys for being with us, or for with me, and I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. Be safe. Don't do anything incredibly stupid. Just stupid enough to be fun. No, I'm sorry. Strike that. Forget I said that. I shouldn't have said that at all. Don't do anything stupid whatsoever. And I will look forward to seeing you guys next week. Thank you very much.